Good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending this first session. So I'm Benjamin Nguyen from INSA Centre de Loire, so in France. I'll be introducing and moderating this panel on youth privacy protection in online gaming. And with us this morning, by alphabetical order, we have Jürgen Bänsch from the ISFE, so the video gaming industry. We have Marie Duboys-Fresney from CNIL, so the French DPA. We have Nicolas Soulie, who's stepping in for Nicolas, so a researcher in economy, and Pierre-Luc Déziel, a researcher in law from Université Laval in Canada. So the object of this panel is to discuss the current situation and possible solutions or improvements to regulations and in online gaming, especially concerning under 18 minors. So just to give a few figures to start with, 94% of under 18 minors play computer games, and approximately 60% play these games online. Over 52% play them every day, and this is a larger proportion than the general public, the general population, where only about 37%, although that's already quite an important figure, play every day. Now, a large proportion of minors, over 60%, feel that signing into an online game is something which is quite trivial. It's something common, and that they should be allowed to do it on their own, of their own decision, right? And they were actually questioned on from which age this should be acceptable, and the general feeling from these minors is that starting from 14 years old, they feel, informed enough to do this on their own. So we can see there's a mass consumption of this type of product, of this type of amusement, especially, again, by minors. And this is something which is the norm today, right? So we're in a situation where this is happening commonly. However, we see that given that we're dealing with this very young public, this asks many questions concerning their privacy protection. And so, indeed, in general, when underage minors sign on to online games, you need, in principle, parental consent. In reality, this probably rarely happens, right? And so the objective of this panel is to discuss, let's say, technical, legal, economic and regulation aspects in order to, again, understand the current situation in online gaming and see if it's possible to offer better protection to under 18 minors, whilst obviously preserving the innovation of the gaming industry, right? So it's not, the objective is not to be critical with regards to the industry, but rather to see how everyone can work together with this protection objective. So I'm first of all going to hand the floor to Mr. Bänsch, who is from ISFE, so the Interactive Software Federation of Europe, who will present the situation of online gaming. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Benjamin. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Jürgen Bänsch. I work for ISFE, the Interactive Software Federation of Europe. We are the European umbrella association representing the video game industry in Brussels. We represent the interest of the industry in front of the European institutions. Our membership is, as you can see on the slide there, we have a membership of large European video game publishers. Those are the ones with the logos on the slide. But we also represent the national trade associations in European member states, and that's in 15 countries. If you can see that, those are the yellow dots on the map there. Maybe before I start, a little disclaimer. I will present about the industry in general, so not implementation of GDPR specific to a specific company, but I would rather highlight some of the key features of that implementation of the GDPR, specifically in relation to privacy of minors. First point I would like to make is that we are a multi-platform industry. So video games can be played increasingly on different devices, from video game consoles to VR headsets and so forth. And that has quite an important consequence for the processing of data. The company that develops a video game or publishes a video game is not always the company that has access to all of the consumer data. And I think that's an important thing to remember. The ecosystem in terms of processing data can sometimes be quite complex. So it's not obvious that if you play a video game that the company who has produced the content of that game is necessarily always always access to your personal data. Secondly, we do not control all of these platforms as an industry. There are a couple of platforms that we consider part of our industry, and that therefore also they abide by the same standards that we impose as an industry, but that is not the case for all of them. Specifically, as an example, maybe this applies to the mobile game industry. So our main business model is the provision of gameplay content and gameplay experiences. And gameplay is actually provided to the consumer mainly in 3 different market segments. First of all, online downloads that accounts for full game downloads, but also in-game purchases. And that accounts for roughly 36% of the market. Mobile games is an increasingly important part of the market, 45%. And then also packaged games, which is only today 20% of the market. So there again, you see the increasingly importance of the mobile video game market, and therefore also, you play this on devices that are not necessarily designed to only play video games on. So what type of data are typically collected in our industry? I distinguish here 5 different categories. The first one is what I would call the network, website, and device data. These are obviously typical for every online industry. This is the data that enables you to be the gameplay to be executed, really. Examples are IP addresses, activity logs, device identifiers, and so forth. Sometimes also the data that are collected by way of cookies. These should be considered personal data, of course, because we operate in the GDPR with a very broad definition of personal data. And so all of these technical data allows directly or sometimes also only indirectly to identify a person, to identify the player, and therefore they fall within the definition of personal data. Then the second category is player account and transaction data. Playing a game usually requires you to create an account where you need to provide some basic contact details, in addition of choosing a username, a gamer tag, and sometimes also a password. This often entails some basic data, basic personal data, the name, the country of origin, which is necessary to know for the company to know which legal framework will apply. The date of birth, of course, we will come to that. But for fee-based games, also necessary transaction data need to be provided, like credit card details and a billing address. Gameplay data is the most typical, and I would say definitely the most important category of personal data. It is the data that is generated by the player by simply interacting with the video game content or interacting with other players. That data is extremely important. It not just allows you to identify certain problems within the game, it also allows you to identify bottlenecks and address the gameplay balance. Now, what is the gameplay balance? It is for a company important to monitor whether playing the game is difficult enough. If it is too difficult, if there are too many bottlenecks within a game, then increasingly people will stop playing the game. And the same goes for a game that is too easy to play. If it is too easy to play, then obviously people will not have fun anymore. So it is important to always find that balance whereby the game is competitive enough and compelling enough to play. Gameplay data also allows matchmaking, for instance. Matchmaking is the art of finding another player of the same skill so that you can play against him and again find that way of compelling gameplay. All of these data are collectively analyzed, they are aggregated, so and they're also pseudonymized. But as you know, pseudonymous data is also personal data, and so they fall within this category of personal data. And then communication and social interaction data. Of course, many games have communication features. It is necessary to communicate with others to play within a group or to play against others and to communicate with each other, but also to communicate with the gameplay provider if you want to flag any problems, any inappropriate content, unsuitable conduct, and so forth. So it's also important to have these features within the game, and the data that this is creating is highly sensitive data and therefore also falls within the category of personal data. And then the last category, of course, for many, the most controversial one, is the data that is provided by third parties. Now, majority of third parties actually are more involved in the technical supply of the gameplay. So this can be data analytics companies, financial institutions, other gaming platforms, and so forth. Third-party data may also be processed from legal and administrative authorities to comply with a certain legal obligation. But finally, also, those data can be processed from third parties with the purpose of providing personalized advertisements and personalized content. I have to say in this context that targeted advertising is certainly not a main business model in our sector. It does exist, of course, and again, mainly in the mobile gaming sector. Advertising exists, as I said, but it's mainly first-party advertising. So advertising for other video game products. And it's also mainly contextual, really, when advertising is being done. So another question is what safeguards are there for children? How are safeguards being implemented in our industry? And is it actually true that parental consent doesn't really happen a lot? Well, on the screen, on the slide here, you can see a classical example of a classical registration process. When a child registers for an account, the date of birth would determine whether you qualify for a normal adult account or not. And this is the so-called age gate, criticized a lot as a weak point. Important to note here that increasingly also there are additional technical safeguards being implemented in those age gates, and also additional verification solutions. Face scans, for instance, happen more and more in this context. However, age gates remain a critical point for all industries, and there is currently a lot of debate on this, on how to do that better. So if a user is deemed underage, then basically there are three possibilities. He or she is refused to play the game altogether. He cannot access the game. He or she can play the game, but in an online mode or in a safe child format. And then finally, he or she is invited to set up a supervised child account. So supervised child accounts are now implemented on almost all of the devices. The child initiates the account, the parent needs to finalize this, and for the child, the privacy settings are set by default on the most restrictive level. Then consequently, the parent can opt in on consent-based data processing activities. And you see on the screen there a couple of examples of this. The sharing of gameplay data to improve products and services is sometimes subject to consent of a parent. sharing of account information, sharing of data with third-party providers, enabling communications, enabling linking with other accounts, and also the viewing and the sharing of user-generated content. So all of these things, at least in a console environment, and on sometimes also many other parental control tools, all of these opt-in processes really are subject to parental consent of a parent. And then secondly, our sector also encourages parents to establish a dialogue with a child or play a video game together. And why do we do this? Because the right to privacy is like any other right of the child. It is a right of the child. Even where the parent exercises this right, the right actually belongs to the child. Parents and legal guardians actually have, under the Convention of the Right of the Child, an obligation to guide children to exercise these rights. And our industry understands this and actually wants to promote the parents to get into a dialogue with their child, to take an interest in what children do, maybe also play the game together, because this, we think, is really the best way for children to learn exactly how to deal with their right to privacy and how to find the right balance. Therefore, we have set up communication campaigns in 16 countries. These are now running for quite some time. In Europe, in addition to that, of course, there are the parental control tools. These allow to do a number of things, and we actually recommend to parents to use this as sort of a support for the conversation with their children. Parental control tools, as you can see on the screen, they also allow to filter content on basis of age, manage playtime, restrict communication with others, and also important, limit or prevent spending within the game altogether. So we think it's important, especially important for parents or legal guardians, to make a series of choices on basis of the device together with the child, so that they can guide the child into the exercise of their right of privacy. That's it for me. I'm looking forward to questions. If you have any further need for information afterwards, you can send me an email, or you can find more information on our website, isfi.eu. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for this presentation of the situation for the gaming industry. So I will now leave the floor to Marie Dubois-Fresney, who's a legal counsel at CNIL, for the vision of the French DPA.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. At the CNIL, we do not have specially dealt with the issue of the protection of minors in video games or online gaming, but however, the issue of the protection of minors online is nowadays omnipresent in every subject that we dealt with. So we recently issued recommendations on the question of online age verification, and I think it's a good subject and focus for the topic that we are here for today. So the main question here is how to strike a balance between the protection of minors and the respect of privacy. Because we know that the more you have to verify the age of the person, the more you have to collect data from this person. So it's a very important question. So verification of the age on the internet user, so in the online gaming it's the same question, comes up against the difficulty for the various technical actors of the internet or the online gaming of really knowing who is the person behind the computer or the smartphone. This need to identify internet users is in fact an issue for the protection of privacy and personal data. Since knowledge of a person's identity can then be linked to their online activity, which can contain particularly sensitive and intimate information. In general, the CNIL recalls the importance of informing and raising the awareness of children, parents, legal officials, and staff of the educational community on good computer practice given the increasing use of digital tools in the lives of citizens. As part of our works of the digital rights of minors, the CNIL published a general recommendation in August 2021, in which we recall that the requirements to verify the age of the child and the consent of parents in respect of his private life, notably to comply with the obligation of the GDPR. One of these recommendations, in particular, calls for age verification system to be articulated around 6 pillars: minimization, proportionality, robustness, simplicity, standardization, and third-party intervention. The CNIL tends to favor the use of devices under the control of users rather than centralized or imposed solutions. In this perspective, the logic of parental control leading to a responsibility of the household to limit access to sensitive content seems, for us, the most respectful of the rights of individuals. However, we are very aware that this logic has a limit because in some cases, the law provides that in certain cases, is the publisher of the site or the publisher or editor of the game that are responsible for age verification obligation. We have a specific example in France because now for pornographic websites, the publisher, the editors have the obligation to make sure that the age verification is certain, and so it's excluded to just simply declare your age on this type of sites. And we think that it could also be the case at some point for online gaming editors. French law and certain European regulations subject the provision of certain services or goods to age condition, we know that, which oblige the site in question to verify the age of the customer. The CNIL calls for vigilance so as not to disproportionately multiply the requirements for online age verifications, leading to a reduction in the number of sites whose consultation will be free. It's very important for us to maintain the possibility for people to consult a website or play a game without having the obligation to register or to give an identity. In 2021, the CNIL issued an opinion specifying for the application of the law a few main principles in order to reconcile the protection of privacy and the protection of youth through the implementation of online age verification system for the specific topics of pornographic sites. No direct collection of identity documents by the publisher of the pornographic site, no age estimation based on the web user's browsing history, and no processing of biometric data for the purpose of uniquely identifying or authenticating a natural person. And we know that this type of biometric processing are used in some countries. So these three limits, we think, could apply in a lot of similar cases of age verification. The CNIL also recommends more generally the use of an independent, trusted third party intended to prevent the direct transmission of identifying data relating to the user to the site or application offering the content in question. Through its recommendation, the CNIL pursues the dual objective of preventing minors from consulting content unsuitable for their age, and it could be the case in online gaming, while minimizing the data collected on internet users by the publishers of the site in question. While waiting for such solutions to be effectively developed in France for the case of pornographic websites, the CNIL considered that verifying age by using a bank card was the most appropriate solution in that it prevents young minors from accessing these contents and is the less intrusive way to protect, in order to protect privacy. We also, for a more general point of view, we have as a regulator a lot of questions concerning the protection of minors in online gaming, but in the internet in general. For example, we have to make sure that video games publisher or editors implement all the obligations regarding the processing of this personal data, and especially the personal data of minors. And we can see that these data in your presentations are very important and sometimes very intrusive. We know that in this type of games, the data are more and more intrusive and more sensitive in some way. And we also have to make sure that the user of these video games are very aware and informed of the processing that are made of the personal data. And on this point, we know that we are very far from a good knowledge of this kind of processing. So that is for me.
Thank you very much. So now I'll leave the floor to Nicolas Soulie.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it works. Yeah. Not sure. Yeah, I know. So from an economic viewpoint, the online game industry is an emerging domain of research. There has been a lot of works on the video game industry, but now most games turn online, so there are more and more revenues, more and more firms, developers that works on that. From an economic viewpoint, that's a very interesting research area because in the case of online video game, there are plenty of research issues at the crossroad of economic, computer science, and law issues. Young adult or teenager, from an economic viewpoint, are considered as a vulnerable person. Of course, everyone is more or less vulnerable, but that's more frequent among teenagers due to the fact that they can make misjudgment. And in the context of online video game, this misjudgment can be related to playing too much. So that's here the question of addiction. That's rather health issue, but also purchase a little bit too much of in-game purchase, which is more an economic issue in this case. There are plenty of different questions because the adoption and use of online video game involve different decisions. The first one in this process is the adoption, the download of the video game, and the consent notice that are provided to the players. Is there specific attention provided to teenagers? In most cases, not so much. So that's the first issue related to consent. Is there an easy way to improve the situation? Not obviously. It has been said identifying rigorously the age of a player will involve new technological solutions. So maybe for small developers, that's cost. For big editors, big developers, that's cost, but they can support it. So it will create maybe some competition issue, meaning that big actors on the market, can follow the rules, but it will be harder to enter the market. That's a first interesting step, how to design a consent notice that respects the the consent of young player. That's an interesting domain because most of the games are multiplayer games. So when you decide to adopt and use this kind of game, you also take into account your friends' behavior, your friends' acquaintance behaviors. So maybe there can be some externality and some negative externality of this kind of network effect. Second, once you adopt and you start to use the game, okay, you have subscribed to the game, you have already provided some personal information, most of the time very basic information, but personal information. And then when you start to use to play on the game, there is this huge amount of in-game data, which is at the heart of many business model of video games and especially online video games. Rather to profile the players and provide her a better game experience, to retain them. And what is known in the literature is that the more engaged is a player, the more likely she is to pay for in-game purchase, to talk about the game around her, and maybe generate networks externalities and attract new players. So the personalization of the game experience is very at the heart of the player loyalty or retention, depending on the case. Secondly, all this data can be sold to third party, so advertiser, which is even if that's first party in most cases, but sometimes maybe to data broker or something like that. Because as many young people play a lot, so platforms can collect a lot of behavioral data and then provide profiling information beyond the only gameplay of a person. So we can expect that some industries can be interested by this kind of data. The main trade-off, and there won't be a clear line in this personalization of gameplay. To some extent, we can talk about some manipulation, but hard to draw a clear line. The main example was the loot box and the inclusion of a kind of gambling mechanism in video games. So there has been some advice for this kind of incentive mechanism or incentive schemes in video game. That's a really interesting finding the right balance between data collection, data processing, data protection, and gameplay experience is a really interesting question, because there is no easy answer to this question. And it involves, in any case, discussions between the industries, the regulator, scholars who are working on this issue, in order to provide fine-tailored, I would say, because it is hard to think that one-size-fits-all solution will be the right way to process. And so we need to work more thoroughly on this question, using collaborative or interdisciplinary projects. And I guess that's all from me.
So, thank you. And so finally, Pierre-Luc, Déziel.
Great, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you very much, Benjamin, also for hosting this panel and inviting me here to this morning. I'm a little bit of a jet lag. I just got here last night from Canada, so if I'm somehow dissipated sometimes, just bear with me, please. So my name is Pierre-Luc Déziel. I'm a professor of law at Laval University in Quebec, Canada. I normally am very interested in privacy law, but health privacy law and how data use technology also have an impact on the health of people. And when I was going through the case law and the scientific literature on video games and protection of privacy of the children or child, there's a couple of things that really struck me on how video games and data had an impact on the health of children. So I just want to discuss this. We were asked to briefly discuss the main questions that we have when we go through privacy in video games. So there are two things that really struck me as very interesting and very important when thinking about privacy and health of children in online gaming. And the first one is how video games can be, not always, but it can be designed to be highly addictive, and how this addictiveness of video games is a consequence or a product of certain data use, and in certain cases also certain privacy invasions. And the second one is how this addictiveness of video games is also targeted in certain cases on children, and children that have, as we know, a limited grasp on very complicated privacy issues. So children research will show that they have basic knowledge of privacy rights. The fact that if they say something to someone else, this information is no longer theirs, it is shared, seclusion, intimacy, but they have a very limited knowledge of more complex privacy issues like risk of re-identification, or they are more vulnerable to nudging or that type of stuff. So secondary use of data, they have a limited grasp on this. So the two things that were really interesting to me is that we have a very addictive product in certain cases that uses very sensitive and personal information that is targeted at young people that have a very limited grasp on complex issues in regards to their privacy. One of the main cases where this is particularly evident is the recent settlement between Epic and Fortnite and the FTC in the United States, a $525 million settlement. You can go check it out online on this issue. But there also is a class action that's been authorized in Quebec. So very recently it has been authorized in Quebec by the Superior Court in Quebec, again against Epic and Fortnite on this particular issue of a very highly addictive product. And so in the case has to be argued, right? It has just been authorized to move forward. It hasn't been argued, but what is alleged by the parents of the children is that Epic and Fortnite knew that they have a highly addictive product, and they failed to inform children and the parents of their children on their right. And so what's interesting to me is that they compare the use of video games, and we can discuss if they're right or not, but it's just interesting that the point is brought in a court of law. They compare the use of video games or this disorder to the addictiveness of cocaine and heroin. So it's in the case law. You can go check it out. The argument rests on a particular definition of a video game disorder that has been put forward by the WHO that compares this type of behavior to a certain form of addiction. In the document that has been handed in by the parents and for the class action, they underline the physiological and psychological health problem that has been developed by the children when they play too much the video game. That includes migraine, back and neck problems, lack of basic hygiene, sleep disorder, and lack of social connection outside of the online community. They also recount outbursts of colère, of frustration, violent behavior outside of, and so just to sum this up, what's really interesting to me is the problem is, yes, privacy, but it goes a little bit beyond, because privacy is really data use is really at the root of a different problem that also spills over into a health context. And so I think it's important that we, as a community interested in privacy, that we also address the health issues that are maybe underlying the use of video games online, especially with vulnerable populations such as children. So I'll just wrap this up here, and I'll let Benjamin take over. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for the comments. I don't know if there are any reactions to what's been said for the moment. So if not, we can start with a few questions that we had. So we've discussed a bit on what's built for the moment in the context of data management, and some information on the data that's been collected. So that's interesting. We've discussed a bit some of the risks. So which were the points that I had. And so basically, maybe the first question would be, so how do the platforms, how do the game editors take into account the fact that here we're dealing with minors, with the problems that have been given here? So there's been this topic of health issues potentially. How do the editors take this into account? I mean, imagine that this is a criticism that's already been given many times. And so how do they adapt to accompany, maybe you explained the families and the minors with regards to their video gaming behavior?
Yeah, I actually fail really to see the link here between privacy and the addiction debate, which is, in my view, a totally different debate. If I would have known that I would have had questions about the addiction debate, one of my colleagues is a real specialist in this and can point you to the lack of evidence on this, the biased research, and so forth and so forth. I will not go into that because it's really not my domain. I look at privacy, I look at data protection, and again, hearing you, I don't see any link between the addiction debate and between the structure of data processing in video games. So yeah, that's
okay.
That's all I can say on this. Yeah,
I understand your position. So if we go back to the data aspects, and so sure. Maybe the behavioral aspects. One of the points that you showed with the data is all the behavioral data that's collected inside the game. So you said this helps maybe structure and build the games. One question I had is that this data sometimes gets published outside the game. For instance, if you look at the games published on fan sites, which probably go through the APIs of the editors, and which can give access to some behavioral information. Of not necessarily the players, but of their pseudonyms, right? Knowing that, I don't know, some person is playing at night, or some person who's playing not during the day, for instance, or not during school hours, or this type of information that can maybe easily help people recognize that an individual is a minor or not. Do you view this as, so is this taken into account? How are the players informed that maybe this information is going to be published? And is it easy for them to control this information?
I think, to my knowledge, a lot of the data is being published by the players themselves. Like they have a lot of business models there where players, also minors, record, what they are playing and aim to communicate about that with their other peers, and that's getting, that's creating a life of their own. Most of the companies are quite restrictive in how they use the data of the players inside. Why? Because it's, for them, it's really important to hold on to that data, and it's not in narrow sense personal data as such. It's, as I said, it is usually aggregated data. It's important for them to see where the appetite of the gamers lie in order to make new games or to make new levels within the games, or to see, where people actually are like to play and come together and do things. That is important information. So they're not easy going to export that type of data outside the game. Obviously, there are fan sites, yes. Most of them actually are not under the control of the publisher themselves, and a big part of them are actually not operating that legally as such, because we have a whole issue of piracy as well, and we have a lot of companies outside the video game industry who copy certain types of content and using fan sites really to distribute that type of pirated material. So we actually are fighting against some of these fan sites. But I guess there are also fan sites that are under the control of the industry. But I think that the data management there is quite responsible in terms of data protection. To my knowledge, I think pseudonymized data, the use of a gamer tag, is an acknowledged way of protecting the identity of the player. And I also believe that even some European Data Protection Board guidelines are referring to that as an acknowledged way to do that. So I think the identity is quite well protected with a gamer tag.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the question that we had, because we were looking into a project with Nicolas regarding the sort of crossing of data, so specifically gamer tags, with other platforms. So typically, if you cross the data with YouTube, if you cross it with Twitch or things like that, not always, but often the individuals are going to use the same tag, or at least it becomes more and more common for them to use them. Maybe at some point they'd have specific tags for each game, but now people tend to have in the gaming domain a sort of tag, well, that they put forward. Maybe you have this information like on the number of different tags that people have cross games, or at least on the platform. And so on those types of platforms where they start filming themselves and where they give their more information, then it's possible to link, okay, the gaming tag with an individual. Okay, not necessarily the physical individual, but at least somebody who's behind the camera and you can see like it's a young person or someone like that. So do you have, or I don't know if this is something which is taken into context by the DPAs or other, on the fact that there's an ecosystem where, okay, data is produced with these pseudonyms, but maybe it's easy to fish out highly, well, I don't know, at least sensitive data. Is this a problem, or is pseudonyms are finally an acceptable solution?
I think it's a real question regarding, maybe, for my knowledge, 2 points. The first one is obviously the information, the legal basis of this communications of data between two actors, and is there a knowledge of the person, of the players, of this communication of data. And the other point is the qualification, the legal qualification of these actors. Are they under the GDPR? Are they distinct controllers regarding this processing? Are they joint controllers? Are they sharing responsibilities regarding this processing of data? So I think it raises a lot of question and legal question in this point.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to comment, Nicolas, on this aspect?
Yeah, maybe some words about fan site. So for sure, information provided, access through the API of a big platform can be reused on these fan sites. Maybe in this case the situation is a little bit different, because in most cases these sites highlight very performant players. So that's not the average player. You won't find in most cases detailed information, as it has been mentioned, but aggregate information based on the ranking or some performance metrics about a given game. So that's not the most general case. When you reach such when you are at the top of some ranking, maybe you are in mind you to become a professional player, or you gain some social reconnaissance or stuff like that. And maybe people are happy about that and aware that they can be externalities for most of them, I guess.
And this is okay even if they're minors, right? Because at what point, because as we've seen here, concerning maybe the game ecosystem, there's some control on the fact that the parents acknowledge that their children have signed on to the game, that they're playing it within certain limits or not. But if they're doing something on a different type of platform and they're trying to get well known because they're good at the game, maybe the parents actually don't know this at all, is this a specific case, right? Maybe parents don't want their children to become famous.
Maybe the children and parents can disagree sometimes. And in this case, a player can be famous without his parents' awareness, probably.
But would it make sense, like, okay, if you've got a child who's good at sport, right, maybe the trainer's going to come and tell you, right, we think this kid's got potential, you should do something. Does this happen in the gaming industry, right?
Yeah.
Can you detect them and say, well, I don't know, you've got potential, you should become an esports player or something?
That's the...
or streamer or whatever.
Yeah, because now playing video games can be a main occupation in life. So people would have strategy to reach their goal, meaning that I want to play in a big team and gain a lot of money, being famous, and so on. And there will be intermediary stages, and probably the first stages would be to create a community around him by being visible on these fun websites. So that's probably one of the first steps in the career of the player. So in this case, I think that most players that are top ranked in a popular game, they are happy about that, and that's not a big problem in this case. That's my
even if they're young, you think? Okay. Right. We also had a bit of a discussion. So this is discussing on the social aspects which are around these platforms. And so we said there are maybe the games in themselves and then some platforms which are beyond this. We discussed offline the question of some platforms such as Steam, which is a platform which integrates both buying games, playing games, and maybe discussing, commenting. Maybe I wanted to have your insights on this type of platforms and how it's different or not, how this should be included in maybe the ecosystem, and how this should be maybe controlled or regulated. There's advertising, there's recommendations, there's some people who give a lot of comments. Does somebody want to comment on this type of platform?
So maybe one word.
Yeah.
So what is interesting in this kind of platform, they provide an integrated environment to play to different video games. So that's very nice from the platform viewpoint, because you have the behaviors of a person across different games. And so you can start to observe, players who are interested in Battle Royale, play this game and start to play this one. So that's interesting insights to develop new video games, to identify new opportunities. That's in economic what we call bundling. You access to different services, meaning different games, interaction features, and so on. That's more easy for you. You don't have to connect to different platforms to change. You have one connection and you access to a wide range of services, including mainly video games. It raises question of competition, meaning to what extent this kind of services can lock in the players. So meaning, if you want to enter the video game market, okay, whether you are generous, you develop a fantastic video game, and then you gain little by little and more quickly after players. Otherwise, you have to deal with Steam to enter in the market. So here, the main issues can be anti-competitive behaviors from the platforms regarding video game developers. There is this question of data once again. So you don't have the data only for one video game, but for a wide range of video game, behavioral data, interaction data, and so on. So it can be interesting to profile, to identify new opportunities for players. To which extent we can discuss about possible manipulation. Here again, there is no universal rule. When you have recommendation, there is room for manipulation. Okay, we well know that there is rank effect, meaning that the first recommendation are likely to be selected more than the other one.
So does this mean there should be more explicability in the rankings?
It can be a solution. So transparency in the ranking, but that's a general question about recommendation systems. Here we are in the context of video game, but with any recommendation system, there are more and more concerns about the algorithm that generate the ranking and that can be manipulated for strategic reason, economic reason by the platform. So that's an issue. And in our case, the privacy issue is even stronger because by providing more games, more features, in this integrated environment, you collect more diverse information about a given player and its acquaintance on that.
Maybe a reaction about this. I think a big concern regarding this type of platform, but also online video game, is the profiling of the players. The creation of some profile regarding the connection between you play this game, so you will like this game, and this gathering of personal data to create a profile of the players. How long are the data have been collected and retained by the editors, the platforms, and it raises for me the question also, in a long time perspective, of the right to be forgotten for these players, and may in this regard, one of the recommendation of the CNIL in the internet context in general, but also in online gaming, is the right to be anonymous in this type of game, and the recommendation is most of the time for the parents to recommend to the young players to play with pseudo. Not to use the really identity of the person, to be in some way protected regarding a misuse of this data, a long conservation of this data. So, yes.
Can I maybe react to that? Well, first of all, the right to be forgotten is an established GDPR right. All of the companies need to abide by that. So I don't understand very well why you say that companies might ignore the right to be forgotten. I don't think that it's absolutely possible if you operate in Europe that you can ignore this right. There's no right for anonymization because it's not in GDPR. It's an acquired right. If I pay my taxes, I would love to have the right to be anonymous, but unfortunately that doesn't work. So that. I don't think it is absolutely necessary to be anonymous. I think it's necessary to protect personal data and to allow the player to do that by all means, but there are certain legal requirements that need to be imposed as well, specifically if you if you buy a number of things, then there's a legal framework that applies there as well. And so companies will try to minimize the amount of personal data as much as possible, but because of the definition being so wide and because of pseudonymous data being also personal data, that is obviously very difficult. Now, the companies that I represent are subject to an organization called PEGI, Pan-European Game Information, which is a network of more than, I think now it's almost 3,000 companies that focus a lot on safeguards regarding minor protection. There's also a couple of requirements also there on data protection. Is based on a code of conduct. It is self-regulation. And so the idea here, it exists for more than 20 years now. The idea is really to be highly protective as regards to children. In practice, for data protection, that means that a company will never knowingly profile a child as such for reasons of targeted advertising. The problem is, of course, that companies often do not know that a child is a child, not just because a child sometimes lies about the age, but it's sometimes also very, very difficult to identify that the child is a child, and therefore that a certain amount of additional protection needs to be imposed. And I think that is one of the key problems here, the conflict between personal data protection and protection of children. If you do not know that a child is a child, then yes, the data of that person will more easily get profiled. Although, again, this is not the main business model of our industry. The main business model is really to process data, to make sure that you have the best possible gameplay experience, and not to ensure that you see certain types of ads. That is not the main business model.
Okay, so we're running a bit short on time. I had lots of other questions I wanted to ask, but I think it's important to give maybe the opportunity to the room to ask some questions or comment if you wish. So there are some microphones. Please come up and maybe just in 2 words say who you are, and then ask your question, and if the question is targeted to a specific panelist.
Thank you. Andrew Adams from Major University. Marie made a very important point that there isn't a one-size-fits-all model that will fit this in terms of games. Something I haven't heard anybody mention is the fact that things change. Even if we say 13 is a lower limit for many of this, for a lot of this, things change between a 13-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 17-year-old. How can we try and improve the situation for instance, the right to freedom of expression, which is clearly part of access to games, particularly online and social gaming, as they get older, and particularly the 16 to 18-year-olds who have more of an expectation of a freedom of expression, but are still technically a minor, and therefore have a greater data protection. What's what lack of one-size-fits-all model that applies in that stratification?
Marie, do you want to comment? I don't know if it was targeted at somebody or if it was a comment.
Thinking about it, yeah, it's a very good question. Maybe regarding the age verification, it's a good question. There is in fact some differences in between countries regarding this limit of age. In France, for example, it's 15 for this type of online gaming. So does it mean that between 15 and 18 you can play without any difficulties? There is no control. It's a good question, and it will be more prominent, I think, regarding the technologies that will be used to control the age of the person. For example, we have a lot of cases in France of facial analysis, not biometric, not facial recognition, but just the analysis of the face to determine the age of the person, and to be able to do it efficiently, you have to raise the age limit in order to be sure that any minors are allowed to buy or to play. So yes, I think the model one size fits all does not work in this type of age verification.
I think the answer to that is to use a tool that is very close to the child and that knows best what is the maturity of the child, and that is the parent, right? And that is why we focus so much on involving parents in, if the parent know what the child does online, if there is a link of trust there, then we don't need necessarily age verification tools and face scanning. The parent can, if the parent is well informed, the parent can indicate and can decide to what extent a child can be independent and make their own decisions, even before the age of 13, if, you know, in some cases. Every child is different. So I think that is why we do that. Industry can do a certain amount of things and can implement safeguards as much as it like, but we cannot do everything. Right? We need to have the parents involved there at some point there as well.
Is there another question? We have time for one, maybe two.
All right. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm Martin Sass. I'm a PhD student for KU Leuven. And we talked a lot about age verification, how to know that a child is behind. You mentioned facial estimation of the age. But I wonder whether this method wouldn't be too privacy invasive as well. And you mentioned that in France right now, there are solutions that are studied about maybe having a trusted party that would verify the age. Can you expand a bit more on this and see what are the pros and cons of using this method, and whether also the industry is ready to welcome this type of solution instead of facial recognition estimation, sorry. If maybe all of you could expand a bit more on the different solution regarding age verification. Thank you.
Actually, as I was saying, the CNIL has studied all different methods of age verification regarding the fact that right now in France for pornographic websites it will be mandatory to implement a real method of age verification. But our conclusion is right now this kind of method and notably the third party, the third independent party to verify the age are not mature enough, are not the sector for a pornographic website has not developed this kind of technologies, and this is not mature. So the only one that we saw that can work but is not 100% efficient is the credit card, the verification by a credit card. But we know that is really not the best way, because there are some minors that detain a credit card. So we know it's not perfect at this time, but for us the best way is this third party, the third independent party. It's the best way to be certain of this the verification of the age and to preserve the privacy. As you said, the facial recognition or the facial analysis or estimation of the age may be efficient, but it's really questionable regarding privacy. So this technology with a third party consists in preserve a sort of double anonymity, because the editors of the site doesn't know who is the person. He only obtains the control of the age, and the verificator, the independent party, know the person but doesn't know which kind of site or which kind of service he has to provide his age for. So for us, it's a good method, but not mature enough at this stage for.
Absolutely, yes. And I'll try to be quick here. I think absolutely industry would love to have a solution that is not too expensive, that works not just for adults, because video games are not porn for many reasons. But one of the reasons there is that we're not talking about 18 plus 18 minus here. Ideally, we're talking about an age verification system that would, identify a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 12-year-old, and so forth. So ideally, so a system that needs to do that, a system that can work legally. It's certainly not helpful that we have all of these data protection authorities saying slightly different things. There are 16 data protection authorities in Germany. They also say different things. So, where to start as an industry? What we want, if there is an easy solution that is not too expensive, that can work also, yes, not just that can work on a pan-European basis, but maybe also globally, because increasingly companies are trying to develop a privacy policy on a global level. And how they do that? They take the highest bar, they take the highest level. And so that would mean that, for instance, a child is considered under PlayStation policy as an underage, under 18, right? The reason for that is just because we have different legal frameworks and they all compete with each other. And so we take the highest. And a system that can, accommodate all of those things would be implemented immediately by our industry. But today there is no such system. There is a problem with legal liability if we do, and children can circumvent it. And I think that holds back a lot of the companies. Face scans, for instance, there's a company acknowledged by the German authorities as the way forward. But it's criticized in France as an example. I don't want to criticize France here too much, but I mean, there is a conflict there, there is a debate, and we need to have that debate, of course. But we also need to have pan-European guidance, because a digital industry is a cross-border industry by definition. We can't have different rules for every country.
Maybe just Pierre-Luc, if you had a comment on the maybe across the Atlantic position.
Yeah, I find it very interesting because the age verification system, the debate was there at the late 90s in the United States and in Canada in regards to mostly porn. So it's different, it's not the same thing, but it was decided that all the debates surrounding the CDA, the Communication Decency Act, and the imposition on website that provides pornography to verify the age, it was decided that it was too much of a burden on the enterprise, and it also, to go back to your point, attended to the freedom of expression of the person that had to declare its identity. So it was really, it was linked to privacy and anonymity also. And so I think it's interesting that 20, 30 years later we have this debate, but it's maybe more open to the idea of having a verification system, probably because the freedom of expression component is less important because we're not dealing with porn here, but something less. Just to go back to the anonymity question, I think it's fascinating to have this discussion across the Atlantic. In Canada, we do not have a right to be anonymous per se, but the Supreme Court of Canada decided in 2014 in a case called Spencer case that we have somehow the right to be anonymous online. We have to take this case with prudence because it was decided around Section 8 of the Canadian Charter, so it's more in front of the state. But it also implied ISPs, so internet service providers, and so it's interesting. It's not in the data privacy laws, but it's more an interpretation of the right to privacy at the constitutional level. That a fundamental component of privacy and freedom of expression also is the right to be anonymous online, and so I think it would apply differently here, but it's interesting to see those debate around privacy, age verification, but also freedom of expression. To me, we cannot talk only about data protection. It's always in a broader context.
Okay, So the organisers tell me we have to stop. So I'm afraid we started a bit late. I'd really like to thank wholeheartedly the panelists for coming for these interesting discussions. There's a lot more to be said. Thank you for attending. We only were able to take a few questions. I'm sure the panelists will be very happy to discuss with you during the break if you wish to reach out to them. So thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you very much.